So here I'm going to show you how to set up the logic for the animator. And we're going to start from this position where we've completed all of the animation clips that we're going to need. I'm just using the ones I had previous, so it will connect together the same way. But you can include this jump landed or jump up if you need to, just like we discussed in the last part. This is typically how they're going to appear when you first completed all of your animations, just as separate tiles that are kind of just floating in space. But really, we don't need most of these because we're going to set up our own nodes by right-clicking in the empty space, create state, or sometimes we'll create from a blend tree. The idle is one of the good places to start. You can see that we've got these this entry tile here, and a line leading to the idle, and the idle is orange where the rest of them are gray. That is because this is the default state. So you typically have a default state, and it's going to be the one where when your program first starts, the entry will lead to the default state. If you ever, for some reason, have to exit the animation process entirely, then we do a transition to the exit, and then it typically just restarts if it's still running. We've also got this special any state node, which we're not going to use in this case, but that's a good one for like damaging or dying. No matter what state your character is in, it will transition from there. So the idea is that each one of these is a clip, and if we want to make a transition from one to the other, we right-click, make transition, and then drag this arrow to the next one, and now this arrow has its own parameters if we click on it. Over here in the inspector, I open up this settings tab, and usually have to drag this down quite a bit to start off with. There are all of these settings that say this is when I'm going to transition from one thing to the other. So currently I'm just using idle and run cycle as an example. But if I click on the arrow, then we can see has exit time, and that's checked. And here's the exit time. This is a percentage. This percentage means how far through the clip is it need to be when I'm going to exit this animation. So if you set this to 1, then you're basically saying, I want you to have completed one complete cycle before you transition away. Or if you set it to 0, it's almost the same thing. It would say, if you're playing over and over in a loop, I want you to have completed a cycle and then reset and then transition. Slight differences there. So you could set this to a particular time, like halfway through the clip with 0.5 or something, but typically we're not going to want to do that because the moment that you press an input key, we want it to transition. So typically I leave that off. Okay? But now it's complaining. Down here it says a transition needs at least one condition or an exit time to be valid. Otherwise it'll be ignored. So what it's saying is I can't transition. There's nothing to tell me to transition right now. And that's because of these conditions down here. This list is empty. If we hit plus, we don't have any parameters. So I actually can't add anything right now. So I'm going to highlight it and hit the minus key. That's because over here, there are 2 tabs. The layers is what we're currently viewing. And then the parameters, we have an empty list, and these come from code. So to see an example of what the parameters are, I'd either have to open up the code that makes the character run, which right now we're not going to get into, or just show you what mine used. So these names and values are the things being fed from the script into the animator and updated as the character runs around and does their thing. Velocity X, and make note of the spelling and the capitalization because they are specific. Velocity X, velocity Y, and grounded. And what these are different kinds of data. If I hit the plus button up here, we can see these are the options for the kind of data that we can use. A float is a number with a decimal point. An int is a whole number, no decimal point. A bool is like a light switch, on or off. And a trigger is like a one-time light switch where you just activate it and then it's immediately off again. But for that one frame, it turns on. So that would be for something like firing a gun, trigger, kind of makes sense, or taking damage one time. You don't want to be continuously taking damage. That would be a Boolean. True, you're taking damage. False, you're not. You just want to say you took damage, that's over with, and then you transition back to the rest. So in this list, I've got 2 floats, velocity X and velocity Y, and grounded, which is a bool, and it's just a light switch on and off. So if I take this, dock it down here temporarily, just so that we can see how the animator is functioning while I'm playing the game. then I hit play. Or actually, I think I loaded the wrong one. Yeah, I did load the wrong one. Whoops. So up here in player, I actually had the example controller loaded in right now. So let me put the May animation controller back on there. There we go. So now I'll hit play. Okay, so as I'm moving, take a look at the number velocity x. You can see it's going up and down. The maximum is 10. It won't ever quite reach 10 because of friction and gravity. And grounded is checked on. That means I'm touching the ground. And velocity x is 0 because I'm not jumping. So watch those numbers. So when I'm off the ground, this gets unchecked. When I'm flying through the air, upward is a positive number. 0 is floating in midair. And then negative is a downward velocity. Okay, so we're using those to transition, and you can see these things popping all over the place. The movement tree is going through my idle animation. Then when I leave the ground, it transitions rapidly to the jump tree. And then when I hit the ground again, it goes to the landed and then rapidly back to the move tree. Okay. And then inside of each of these, and I think I may have shown these before, here's velocity x, and it's helping to blend between these cycles. Here's the jump tree. Once we transition to it, my velocity y is helping us transition. So we need all three of those data types to make this work properly. So I'm going to go back and reinstall my example controller, which is just blank. There we go. But we're going to keep in mind, put this back up here, that we need the exact same parameters. So in May animation, and you can do this too in your project because you'll have May animation in there. You can read these three: velocity x, velocity y, and grounded. So let's go ahead and create those. So in our example controller, just double check that I've put it on there. There we go. I'm going to add float velocity x, add float velocity y, picture capital X and capital Y, and then our bool, which is grounded. That's it. Now, because on the player we have a script attached, simple player controller script, all of those parameters are already being fed into this animator. So even without anything else happening, without any proper transitions, these numbers should still update. So if you take this and put it in a different window and then hit play, even though your animations won't play, your idle will, you should see these numbers changing. So it's a good idea to take this, put it in a different window if you can, or just dock it down here and then hit play and make sure that all that's functioning. Okay? All right, so with those in place, now we can make our proper transitions and our logic. You can go ahead and delete all of these clips. Don't try to delete exit, entry, or any state, and I would leave idle there for the moment, but you can go ahead and delete all of these because there are clips down here in our animation folder, and if you drag one back up again into here, it makes a new node with the motion attached to it right here. We can also change whatever motion we have attached by clicking on the tile, going to the motion, and then just browsing for a new one or dragging it up into that field. Note that we also have control over the speed of the playback. So right now idle is playing at a speed of 1. This is just a multiplier, so if you set it to 2 or 3, it's 2 times or 3 times as fast. I don't quite know what mirror does in this playback. Maybe it goes to the end and then back to the start again. I don't mess around with that. You can offset where the cycle begins from. Most of this other stuff I don't really play around with for the most part, but you can explore that or look up the functionality there. It's not really necessary. First thing we're going to do, let's go ahead and delete idle too. Let's start fresh. We're going to make a new state. So right click, create state. We're going to do from a new blend tree. Okay. So here's the name of it. It's just blend tree right now. If you want to rename it up at the top, this would be our motion tree. So this will track how fast we're moving side to side and what animation we should play at that time. That's all out here because to edit the motion tree, we have to double click to get inside. We get this little tile and it's got a slider on it. It will pick a value by default to treat as the blending value, but we can set it up here in the parameters. Velocity x is actually correct, but we've only got velocity x and y because there are only float values. Note up at the very top, we've got different types of blend. 2D simple directional means we can have both X and Y at the same time. That would probably be more for like a top-down game. 2D freeform directional, I'm not even sure what that means. Direct, so just when it is this value, we'll set it to this other thing. Let's not mess around with any of those right now, but they are exciting for different purposes. 1D is all we need, one directional, one slider, and velocity X is the correct one. Down in motion, this list is empty, so we're going to click plus, add new motion field twice, and then we get to see this little graph up here. So these are whatever clip that we're going to play, and then it's going to have a threshold for when should it play that clip. So let's drag in or select our idle and our run. So here's my idle, and then here's my run cycle. So already down here at the bottom, you could click play and then drag this little red slider to see it transition, and it should work out properly. If you get anything really bizarre, then it may have been a product of how you animated your character. You may have rotated in a weird way or done things that were incompatible for transitioning. At that point, you may want to consider going back and redoing your animation clips if this doesn't blend between the two. It's unlikely to happen in this circumstance unless you did some very crazy animation. But so far, so good. So we're going to blend between 0 and 1 between those two clips. But here's the thing. That's not what we want the threshold to be. And by default, automate thresholds sets it from 0 to 1 just to have a 0% to 100% kind of spread. So we're going to uncheck that so that we can set what the threshold should be. Idle at a threshold of 0 means you'll only hold still entirely when our speed is 0. We may want to set it a little bit higher than that, maybe not. Our run cycle threshold says you will be in the full run cycle when you're going 1 unit velocity left or right. That's far too low. But if we set it to 10, we're never really going to reach this full run cycle, which, as you saw when I was demonstrating, is probably not what we want. So the threshold can be a little bit lower than your maximum values. I would say the threshold for this run could be as low as 5. So halfway through our acceleration, we're in the full run cycle, and then it just continues to play that as the character speeds up a little bit. That would be reasonable. Or I think I actually set it a little bit higher than that at 7 or 8. Let's just say 8. So then we hit the full run cycle stride right before we max out our speed. That's fine. Now for the low end, for idle, we may want to set this idle to not start to transition until a higher speed. We might want to set it to something like 1. So when you're just slowing down still, just a little bit, or just speeding up, the character hasn't started trying to animate its run cycle yet. We'll see how this looks because a lot of the logic in the animator needs to be compared to how it plays in the scene. And it can be really confusing and abstract until you just go ahead and hit play and test out what happens. So right now in our animator, all we've got is this motion tree. It's the default, so we're going to go there and never transition away. And inside of it, we've got this one blend state. So let's hit play and see what we get. Here's my character playing their idle, and I start to move, and they appear to start to run. Now, if you want to see what value we're looking at, just hit player anim right here, and then get the animator docked somewhere else so that you can view these parameters. This is a little awkward because I'm recording and I want to be able to have a nice big scene for you guys to see, but down here we can see. And then also, there's the blend tree. So we can see it blend between the two. So if I just tap this button, see how I'm able to move and my feet don't move at all? Okay, so that's one possibility. But let's stop that. If instead I set this threshold at 0, okay, and then play. When you make your changes, be sure to stop, play back, and then resume. Now if I tap, the character's legs kind of twitch as it starts to transition into that run cycle. And then if I hold it down, I start to get these big loping strides. Okay, so that's a possibility. It's up to you which you think looks better. I think that a little bit of motion makes sense. But what I did in my original one is I used the run cycle twice. because I thought if you're getting up into speed, you should be moving your legs more rapidly. And then when you finally get to full speed, then your legs can move a little bit more slowly because they're doing their full stride. So I'm going to hit plus one more time to add a third motion field. And I'm just going to drag in the run cycle one more time. So now the threshold, it automated and gave me a 16 threshold. I don't actually want that. I want this one to be at, let's say, 3 or 4. Let's do 4. Okay. So this one's at 4. It actually should sort like this now. And I'm going to have the playback speed, which is what this column is, set to 2. So that means initially my run cycle will play twice as fast and then slow down to being just as fast as I animated it. If I play down here to preview, here's what that will look like. Fast, slow. So it means that when I tap that button, we're going to get these faster little micro steps and then slow down. So let's see what that looks like in play. So you can kind of see that we get faster leg motion and then slower leg motion, but it's really invisible for the most part. And this is sort of a picky animator thing or a picky game designer thing. Nobody's really going to notice this but you. If you want to put in that kind of detail, good for you. If you don't, it's probably not going to be noticeable. Okay. Also now, if I hit jump, nothing changes. So my character still idles and still runs in midair because we don't have a transition away. But in the animator, we do have those parameters, and we do have grounded being turned on and off. Okay, so you probably know what we're going to transition from. We're going to use grounded as our next transition. If you're on the ground, you run. If you're not on the ground, you do the midair stuff. Okay. All right, so back into the animator again. I'm going to stop docking it back and forth and just do this. It's going to be a little bit less annoying, I think. So back in the animator, I'm going to double click on the blank space to exit that tree. And we're going to create a second motion tree. Right click, create state from new blend tree. And this one is going to be the jump tree. Just like that. Now we don't have a transition and we actually don't have any clips inside of here yet. So let's make the transition first. Right click on motion tree, make transition, drag down to jump tree. Okay. And then we want to click on that arrow to see what are the settings. Why are we going to transition from one to the other? And I'd like to open up this settings window as well. So we definitely want to set a condition this time. When we're not grounded, we want to transition. So we click the plus, change the type of the condition to grounded, and then we've only got two choices, true or false. False is when we're off the ground. We were presumably on the ground, now we're not, now we're in midair. So that's the transition. Okay. We can make a second one back like that. And now you've got an arrow pointing down and an arrow pointing up. And if we click on that one, we can add grounded true. So if we hit the ground, we go back to here. If we leave the ground, we go up to the jump tree. For just the moment, let's just leave those transitions exactly as they are. They've got all sorts of parameters up here that aren't really doing anything, or aren't doing anything helpful. But we're going to leave them imperfect for the moment and just deal with the fact that we can now transition correctly and we can put our clips in our jump tree. So let's double click on our jump tree. We've got the same blending node. We want to add now 3 motion fields, one for moving up, one for moving down, one for midair. Again, I'm going to disable the thresholds so they're not automating. And I'm going to browse for each one of the 3 clips like this, or drag them from the project view. I want jump up first. I've got up and up big. I don't remember which one was which, so. Midair, so jump midair, and jump down. So I can see what those 3 look like by hitting play down here. Or actually, we don't even need to play. We can just drag this. And we can sort of see, if you ignore the position of the limbs and just look at the feet and hands, here's my up, here's my midair, here's my down. That's fine. If I hit play, it looks a little weird because that first clip has pushing off the ground. So I'm just going to stop that playback. So that should be fine. And now the only thing else to set is the threshold. The thresholds on this one are a little bit weird because you need to have the smallest number on top. And in this case, the smallest number is the wrong way. So jump up is actually a positive number. Jump down is a negative number. So let's reorder this a little bit. I didn't think about that. But if I just re-enter in this field, jump down, a negative number, I think it reorders itself. Let's just see. So if I'm traveling downward, I want a little bit of transition space between the traveling up, down, and midair. So I'm going to put like -4. It didn't reorder itself. Oh, there it goes. It did. Midair is 0. So that's right at the equilibrium point. And then jump up, I'll put as +4. So we've got a little bit of transition space between those three. By the way, I don't quite remember what the transition space was supposed to be for these three. I'm just kind of guessing, but you can tune these. You could change them to be asymmetric. You can push even like the midair towards the negative or the positive numbers. Just know what they represent. So let's give it a try. Here we are playing, jumping. Oh, what's happening? See that? What's going on here? So if we select player anim so that we can see our values, I'm going to go back out here, press transitions, and try to jump. You know, it's not leaving, and then it suddenly did. Not leaving the ground, and then it sometimes does, sometimes doesn't. So what's happening here is that our settings for those transitions are interfering, and they're interfering a lot. But just before I go back, let me check, is this reading properly and blending properly? No, it isn't. Okay, do you know why? Maybe you caught it while I was doing it. This blend tree is using velocity X. It needs to be using velocity Y. Okay, so now, if I hit play, that value at least should be jumping up and down. There it goes. Even if we're not transitioning properly, but now it's sporadically sometimes playing correctly, depending on if we've hit just the right timing here when this long idle has completed. And that'll change based on if I'm running too, because those run clips are shorter. So now it's working more frequently. Let's fix up this stuff, though. There's a big mess in there. The transition from motion to jump should not have an exit time. We should not establish that we're at a certain point in that clip before we exit. So let's just turn that off entirely. Grounded false is correct. If I open the settings, we've also got a transition duration. A fixed duration means it always takes a certain amount of time to go from one clip to the other. So it's sort of blending between the two. You can see that represented up here, where if I drag this timeline header, then that's the transition. Just a quarter second is what that represents to get from one to the other. That might be something that we want, maybe not. We could turn this off, and then if I open this a little bit, this is a percentage now. So how much of the clip should we use to transition? You can do it either way, but one way or the other, there's going to be a duration. You could have the duration be instant, and in the case of jumping up, I kind of want it to be instant. So I'm going to set a fixed duration of 0. So that means it will just instantly pop from one to the other, because the way I animated my clip was to start by pushing off the ground anyway. So I'm going to have an instant transition. On the other one, we definitely don't want an exit time here either, okay? Because I don't have a landing portion of my clip. Do we want a transition of 0.25 seconds? Maybe, I don't know. Because in this case, if we say an instant duration transition back, the character is going to pop right back up to fully standing immediately, which might look weird, but let's try it. We'll set it to 0 as well. So we have two instant transitions now. Fixed duration of 0, no time to exit. Let's go ahead and play. So here we are standing and walking. And then if I jump, see a little bit flickery. And then when I land, it's just immediately back into running or into standing. That's why we have those transition states sometimes, because this looks a bit weird. Boom. Boom. Okay. Even the upward traveling one looks a bit strange, a little bit flickery, really. And as I already kind of established, the clip that I made for traveling upward has some stuff that I really shouldn't have in there. It's got the push off and the upward travel in one clip, where I should have broken that up into 2 clips. But what's happening is I can sometimes see that when we shouldn't. Okay. So let's fix this a little bit. The transition 2 being 0 might make sense, maybe. And what I could do to fix this is to have the jump tree have the upward moving threshold somewhere else. If the threshold were higher, then we would be in the midair position transitioning to jump up during that jump. Or if it were lower, so if, for instance, we made it at like 1, we would enter into that jump clip immediately in any upward motion beyond 0. And so that could be a good idea, and we would transition very late back to the midair. Let's try it with just that change, without anything else, and just watch. So pushing off the ground looks fine. It's still a bit flickery, but maybe that's not our solution. We can change this number during play, but it usually resets itself. Actually, I think with the animator it won't, but lots of things do. Let's change it back to 4 to just see the difference. I feel like the midair stuff is a bit softer, so we potentially want that. Okay. We can also try, okay, it didn't reset itself, so that's good. We can also try allowing this a small duration. So transition duration, let's just say 0.25 like it had, quarter of a second. Now that's way softer, but also we don't get any of the impact of the jump. So maybe we should make this a bit faster. How about 0.1? So 1/10 of a second. It's fine. It sort of lacks an impact, I think, but we got rid of some of the glitchiness that we were seeing before. Okay. There might be a solution here if we go even faster. How about 0.5, 5%? I kind of see a snappiness there now, and that's feeling better. And we definitely don't have the glitch anymore. So that's pretty good. And 0, no transition. It's really instant. It's just a little too harsh. So I think 0.05 is a very, very small transition, but it's enough that it makes me feel like we're getting a little bit of snap. So let's do the downward travel then. If I click on this other arrow, and I'm just leaving this playing for now with the animator, we have an instant transition back to standing, which is probably too harsh also. Let's do the same thing. Let's give it a transition of 0.1, 10%. So at least the arms have time to travel downward now. 0.25. So now we kind of see the arms doing something weird, sort of flailing around. Okay. So my solution to this was to make a new clip. I didn't like how the transition worked. I didn't like how the softness felt, like the feet weren't actually engaging with the floor. And so what I did is I left this one at 0 and I inserted another animation in here. Let's stop the playback and let's put that extra animation in here. So here I'm going to right click, create state, empty. So this one can be any clip. If I browse, I've got jump landed. And I'll name this state landed. And what I want to do is transition not to here, but to here, and then to here. So it's going to just take a little detour from the tree to play this clip and then go back to my motion. What does this clip look like? Landed. So we start from this falling position, hit, and then stand up. So I just want to get this part, and then it can transition away however fast it needs to, which is probably going to be pretty fast. But I want this to instantly activate. And look at the time frame here. This is 5 frames, which is out of 30 total. So this is a whole second, 5 frames out of 30. It's a very, very fast transition holds for quite a while, and then transitions just back in the last 10 frames. So it's a very quick motion. So again, we need to set our parameters. So this transition, I don't want an exit time, absolutely not. I want it to be instant, so 0 duration. And the condition is that we are grounded. This one, though, is a little trickier. I want this clip to sort of play, but at some point I just want it to transition out very quickly. So in this case, I'm going to leave it with an exit time. And an exit time of 50% right in the middle of that clip is just about perfect. And a transition duration of 0.25 still doesn't get us all the way through the clip. So that could be already by default correct. Without having a condition, it means you're going to start playing and then just exit because you're set to exit on a certain time. Let's see how this works, but those numbers might need tweaking. So that looked okay standing still, but when I'm moving, the character's feet are sliding all over the ground. So it's taking too long. Okay, holding still, it looks pretty good. So we could have an extra condition where if you're not moving above a certain value, then we play that one. But if you are, then we play a different one. There's possibility to do all sorts of transitions here. Okay, so this needs to be quicker. I'm going to leave this playing, grab the clip, or sorry, grab the transition. And did I have a certain, okay, yeah, I set that to 0. I just want to check. This one's the one. I'm going to say the exit time should be probably 0.25 also. So the duration means that we'll be out of the clip by halfway through what I animated. So we get a little impact, a little sliding feet, but it's still a bit quicker now. How about we set the transition duration to even lower? I can see the impact now, but it's not sliding so much. And I think the exit time's good. We don't want it to hang out even longer than that, but we could do sneaky things like speed up the playback of this clip and then set the exit time later. But I think that's just about right now. Doesn't feel weird. I don't see any visual hiccups, really. And everything seems to transition properly. So there we go. That's basically the process of setting up this animation controller. You need to watch your animation clips play back to you, go through and check all the transitions, look at the duration, exit times, transition times, and then think about what you want to happen on the screen when you're doing each one of your motions. So that's kind of it for the lecture, really. It's just a little bit to wrap your head around. The problem is, if it's not this exact situation, what do you do? So if you've got a character that is going to encounter 0 gravity, would this work? And the answer right now is no, because our midair position has is just fine, actually, our midair position, but our jump up position has push off in it, and so it's going to look really weird. The character's going to glitch over and over again. So if I set in the player controller the gravity, let's see, where are we? Rigid body, gravity to lower. Let's set it to 1. Then you'll find it's going to look kind of weird. There we go. Oh, I'm moving way out of the screen. Let me zoom out just a little. You can see her glitching over and over as she travels up. I've got a character controller, by the way, that if I release spacebar, then the character's jump cancels, essentially. So I can kind of tap it low, which looks okay, or hold it, and that's when it looks really odd. So at that point, we'd have to think through something else and make that clip different so that we could have this work properly. There's no reason why we couldn't have had a transition, push off, then the jump tree. I just did it this way. So if you want to animate your stuff differently, that'd probably be a smart thing to do, because the character would work in more situations. Okay, so that's basically our lecture. I know it doesn't seem like a lot, but it can be really fiddly, and you're probably going to have to mess with it quite a bit before it looks completely correct. You may even need to go back into your animations and change the way that you animated things. This can be very, very time consuming sometimes. So if I decide that I've made a big mistake about that push off, then I'd come into here to reanimate my character and take out this part and put it in a different clip. Just for an example of how I would do that, let me show that. I'm going to select, so I click this first one and then shift click the second and hit Control C to copy. Then I'm going to delete, deselect, delete this and move this back to 0. Then I'm going to make a new clip, create new clip, and I'm going to call this push off. And I'm going to hit the recording button and then paste. And so what I've got here in push off is just that. And since that's all I've got, I want to make this take just a little bit more time. I don't want that transition to take more time. I just want the clip to hold. So I'm going to copy and I'm going to paste all the way out at 1 second. So I've got a lot of generous time for this to complete and transition. So nothing's happening here. It's just this first little bit. Okay, so now that I've got that, stop that. Go back to the animator. It's appeared in my animator right there. And I can just place this right where I want it to because it's already correct. And let's play this because I've changed my up clip now. Let's just play this without connecting that. It actually looks completely fine without that push off. It's just that I was being picky and I thought I needed a little bit of emphasis at that beginning point. Okay, so it looks fine without that push off, so we could just stop there. Or I could say, nope, I'm too picky, I want to do this. So I'm going to make this transition to the push off and then to the jump tree, the same way that we did with landed. This one is going to be grounded, being false, and I don't want an exit time, and I want the transition to be instant, just like we had. Then for this one, I want the exit time to be very, very soon, so like 0.1 or 2. Let's make it 0.2. And the transition duration doesn't really matter because it's going to look the exact same as my first motion. So I'll just make it 0.1, a very, very quick transition. Oops. And no condition. So let's view that and see how it's changed. Okay. Some glitchiness. So some glitchiness, and then we want to see how is it transitioning. Is it taking too long on that push off? Is it taking too long to get to that push off? Is it taking too long to get to the blend tree? See, now I've got like this mandatory pose, even when I tap my jump key, of these pushing legs, and it's playing far too slowly. Remember how long that clip was? It's too long. Okay, it's making these numbers skew. So I'm going to reopen this transition out. The exit time is going to be actually 0. And then the transition is going to be 0.1. So it's almost like it starts exiting the minute it gets to play. But if you look at this graph down here, you can see they're going to superimpose over each other. We're going to start playing this, but then we're going to transition away. And by about this point, we're 50-50, then we're gone. So here it's still 100% on my push off, 50-50 to the jump tree, then we're gone. That's probably going to feel a little bit better. Let's try it. Okay, just let it resolve itself when it first loads. That's fine. It's still taking an age to get out of there. Look at that. I might have said something wrong, like it's exit time. Oh, okay, I know what's happening. We're never really getting to the exit time until it's played through once. Setting it to 0 means it has to cycle all the way through to the end. Okay, so we don't want that. So maybe we don't want an exit time, but we do want a transition time. But then what do we do here for this condition? We have to supply something. We'd have to supply velocity y, or grounded still being false, or something like that. And now this is getting very, very strange. Okay, so let's say we do want an exit time. We're going to make it tiny, 0.05. We do want a transition time, 0.1. This should still work properly, and we don't want a condition. Let's see. You can see how picky this gets and why I ultimately didn't use this. Ooh, we might have it. It's at least not getting in the way now. Still glitchiness. Let me tap. Fast enough to make it through all of those, but it's looking very, very twitchy, very teleporty. I don't really like it. Possible I could alter this further. Exit time 0.05, exit time 0.1, duration of transition 0.1. I really don't like it. Not at all. So let's go back to just removing it. Transitions go away. So we set a transition to the jump tree, condition of grounded being false. No exit time, no transition time. And in this case, really, I think that's the solution. I think it's just let the cat's body completely go into that stretched out pose in one frame, because that's what's happening. Don't even allow a transition. Well, okay, let's play with a little transition, because I don't know that for sure. Let's do a transition duration of 0.1, just to see. Is that better? It's a little softer. It's actually a lot softer. But now the arms travel from one pose to the other. We've lost some impact, but we've gained some fluidity. 0.05, you can see how picky you can get with this. Now there's just an instant where if her arms are up, they travel down. I think that's probably the compromise for me. Just a transition duration of 0.055%, and then just going immediately to that upward traveling position. Okay. The benefit should be that if I go back to my player controller and change the gravity lower, that we won't get as much twitchiness now. In fact, we don't get any. So that's the benefit. Without having that push off part of my animation, it's actually much better. There we go. And remember, you can have cycles in these poses. The safest one is the mid-air one to have a cycle in. It will just go round and round and round very quickly in that cycle. Probably don't move the character very much. Just do little things like limbs jittering back and forth a little, or the ears fluttering, or the hair. There we go. Seems to work properly even with low gravity now. Okay. So hopefully that was helpful for a sort of primer on how to use this, how to use the parameters. If you do want to dig into the script to see what's feeding what, then in the scripts folder, you can open up the simple player controller, or you can just briefly read it in the inspector here. You can see there's a reference to the animator right there, and then it gets set. And then down here somewhere, animator set bool, animator set float, animator set float. That's what's feeding the animation controller right there. At the end of update, after it's called all of its functions, and we know what we're going to tell the character to do, it's setting everything right there. You can actually do it to player input as opposed to physics forces. So you can tell when the player is pushing a button and have an animation play regardless of what the player is doing. That would be better for like skating on ice and things like that. But this is how I'm doing it. All right. So if all of that goes well and you have everything just the way that you like, then come over to your prefabs folder and then export your character along with everything that drives them. Just go ahead and leave everything included that is a part of their playback, including the scripts, and that will do it. We'll be able to play and experiment with the character jumping around. If you're going to try adding any other functionality, you would need to know how to script in the control for it, because currently this is all the character can do. So if you were going to make them duck and crawl, you would need to know how to put that player input in and how to feed in parameters to the animator that give you the signal that this character is ducking and crawling. Or if you wanted to have them take damage, then you would want to have something feeding the animator to say, this is when the character is taking damage. So that would be an instance where I might put a state up here, damage, that goes from any state, right? But then once you've done that, where does this go from here? Do you transition it right back into motion tree? Do you transition it to exit and hope that it re-enters in entry, it would, but that would be no better than going to the motion tree. I typically just go right back to the motion tree. I'm going to do something like that. But you can get lots and lots of states, lots of different switches, and then this can get complicated. All right, hopefully that goes well for you. Ask questions in Discord if you have trouble, and I will see you later.